Lately, I've been noticing a lot of hate and opposition against bike lanes, especially in my city, Montreal. People keep blaming them for all kind of urban problems, especially the belief that they would be the cause for car traffic. So in this video, I want to take a closer look at these kinds of claims and go through the most common arguments against bike lanes and see if they hold up. I personally bike many times a week, not as a hobby, but as a form of transportation to go to classes or to go to work. But on the other side, I also have a car, so I know a bit of the reality of both, and it's really frustrating to see such misinformation against bike lanes. So I want to do my part to spread the facts about this topic. So anyway, let's get into it. First argument, bikes take space from the cars. So yes, literally, this is true. When you build a bike lane, you remove some space from the cars to give them to the bikes. But the key point here is that bike lanes make cycling an attractive option and thus would encourage more people to bike. And that means fewer cars on the road. So even if there is less space, there's also less cars. So it basically balances out. Actually, there are studies that show that bike lanes even reduce congestion in some cases. This is probably explained by even if main roads are very large, many lanes wide, the final destinations that people go to is often narrow streets or one-lane streets with slow speeds and pedestrians because at some point people have to leave their cars. Therefore, you can kind of compare this to a water pipe. The water pipe is a highway or a main road. If it's large, then yes, it's cool. It can transport a lot of water, but if the opening at the end is small, then the water is gonna start clogging up in the pipe. That's exactly the same for traffic. You can have very wide highways, very wide roads in the city, but in the end they branch out to narrow streets. So if you have a lot of people on the highway, it's gonna clog up at some point. So you can just reply, oh, maybe we should just make the streets wider inside the city. But in a city, we can't just pave everything just to make roads wider. Otherwise, there is no city anymore. Therefore, if we don't want our cities to look like very ugly places with wide streets, then building bike lanes a bit everywhere in the city is very important. They take up less space and are more efficient at transporting people inside of a city, especially for short trips and busy places where a lot of people go to. Anyway, you know that bikes are more efficient when with one bike lane you go faster than cars stuck in traffic, even though they have 3 lanes for them. I see that basically every day on my commute to classes. Now, when a city tries to convert a lane for cars to a bike lane, some people will say that it's an attempt at completely banning cars inside of a city, which is an exaggeration. Removing one lane for cars is not removing all car travel. Having good cycling infrastructure is not mutually exclusive of having some space for cars. And if you compare the space that road takes compared to the space that bike lane takes, it's not even comparable. For example, Montreal, which has a relatively good bike infrastructure, the bike lanes only occupy about 1% of public space in Montreal. So it's really reasonable to take some of that space from cars to give them to bikes. Plus, less cars on the roads also means less need for parking, which leaves us with even more space for bike and pedestrian infrastructure. Some people say that parking spots are being removed without a good reason. Well, if people switch from driving to biking to go to places such as work, then it makes sense to remove some of the parking spaces in those places. Lastly, well, I talked a bit about this, but bike lanes are much more space efficient than car lanes. You can easily fit 2 bike lanes inside only 1 car lane. So to conclude that point, yes, bikes take space from cars, but for good reasons. Next point, I don't like biking or I'm a car person. That is actually totally valid. Some people maybe need to drive long distances, some people need to carry heavy equipment, or some people just enjoy driving, which is okay. But here's the thing, not everyone fits those criteria. Lots of people have short commutes, especially in a big city. Not everyone needs to carry heavy stuff daily, and not everyone likes to sit in traffic. So saying that bike lanes are useless because I don't want to bike or I cannot bike is very egoistical. Also, many people are forced to drive because there is no other alternative. For example, no safe bike infrastructure or no reliable public transit. If we build good alternatives to driving, people will start using them, and that includes bike lanes. And if more people start to bike, then that means less people on the roads, and that means less traffic for people that want or need to drive. So it's basically a win-win situation. The third point, nobody uses the bike lanes. It is true that in some cases bike lanes might not be used that much. For example, if a bike lane is not protected. For example, those bike lanes that are separated from cars only with a painted line. If you put one of those on a road where cars drive very fast, well, of course no one is gonna use it. Some bike lanes are also isolated, so they're not connected to a network of bike lanes, which can make it impractical or even unsafe to ride a bike. And very important, there's also the concept of induced demand, which explains that if you build one more lane for cars, then there's more space for cars, so you would think that it would decrease traffic. But actually no, because it encourages more people to use this brand new wide road, so in the end it will be more attractive, so more people will start using it, and therefore after some time traffic will be as bad or even worse than before. But the cool thing is that the concept of induced demand also works for bikes. The more you build safe, practical bike infrastructure, the more people will use it in the long term, even if at the beginning it might not look busy. Actually, here in Montreal we can already see the effects of that. Lots of bike lanes have been built these past few years, and therefore bike usage has increased, as you can see on this graph. And I sincerely hope that this trend can go on. Next point, bike lanes are bad for businesses. Well, from what I know, it's not cars that visit shops, it's people. So if the streets surrounding the businesses are more pleasant, easily accessible for pedestrians and bikes, you can actually attract more people to those businesses. Because again, bikes and pedestrians take less space than cars. And large and busy roads are not a fun environment to be around. But you might say, oh, but the business owners themselves are against the bike lanes. Well, first, maybe those owners are saying that before or during a bike lane is being built, not after the positive effects of bike lanes come. Plus, owners might be against bike lanes because they themselves drive to their shops. So they complain not because it's bad for their businesses, but because it's bad for their car addiction. Next point, bike lanes make accessibility worse and are ageist. Well, this is just not true. It's actually the opposite. A good chunk of the population of a city cannot drive, basically kids and very old people. So something we can say is that it's ageist to force everyone to use a car to go anywhere in the city. With bike paths and pedestrian infrastructure, it gives them a good alternative to go around the city alone, without the need to use their parents or other family members as their own personal taxi driver. Also, bike paths can be used by people with mobility devices, such as a wheelchair. For example, if the sidewalk is too bumpy or too narrow, or if there's just no sidewalk at all. So, all in all, bike lanes actually improve the accessibility and mobility of people that cannot drive. Next point, it's impossible to carry things on a bike. Sure, you cannot move a fridge on a bike, but how often do you actually need to move a fridge? It makes no sense to say that we don't need bike lanes because of that once per year event where some people will need a car, but also nothing prohibits people from owning a car for uses like that. Again, adding bike lanes does not equal to banning all uses for car. You can even do a bit of both, depending on what you need to do and where you need to go. For that, I'll give you a personal example. Two of my hobbies are playing hockey and golf with my friends. For those hobbies, I use my car for two reasons. First, I need to carry a lot of heavy stuff such as hockey equipment or golf clubs. And second reason, I have to go very far from my house and there is no bike infrastructure. But for other trips such as going to classes or going to the supermarket, I do those by bike because it's very practical, it's close to my house, and there's good and safe bike infrastructure, so I don't need a car to do those trips. And like those trips, most trips in a city can be done by bike. Going to school or to the office or to events or going grocery shopping. Some people think that grocery trips must be done by car because it's impossible to transport things by bike or by walking. Sure, if you go once every 2 months to buy $500 worth of stock at Costco, then yes, it's gonna be difficult to transport that by bike. But I wish more people would just buy things on the go at local markets. Therefore, you buy fewer products at once, so it's easily transportable by bike. Oh, and this way you're promoting local businesses instead of Costco. So you're doing two good things for the price of one, which actually goes back to the point that biking can help local businesses, not hurt them. Next point, in the winter, bike lanes are useless. If the snow is regularly removed from the bike lanes, and it's the case in the majority of bike lanes in Montreal, then you can safely cycle on them. If you are still scared of falling or whatever, then you can buy winter tires for bikes. Also, there exist electrical bikes with thicker tires for people that don't want to exercise too much in the cold winter morning on their way to work, which is understandable. And as for the cold, well, everyone walks outside in the winter, right? And most people are able to walk outside just fine in cold temperatures. But if you really don't like winter weather, it's my case by the way, think of it as if you went skiing. So just put gloves, put many layers on, put on a good coat and a scarf, and you're good to go. Plus, after a couple of minutes of cycling, you might even start to sweat, so you won't even get that cold. Next point, bikes don't respect the rules. Of course, some cyclists don't respect any rules, but so do drivers every single day. People speed, run red lights, run stop signs, are distracted on the phone, or do drunk driving. So, with the same logic, we should ban cars because of those few reckless drivers. Makes no sense, right? Also, another point, North American infrastructure is not very friendly to cyclists. For example, the constant stop signs or red lights and the poor road design in general all make cycling very frustrating and even unsafe. That of course does not excuse rule breaking, but it highlights a deeper issue. Road infrastructure in North America is very inefficient at moving people. One major problem is the overuse of stop signs at intersections. These are not only inefficient but also unsafe, including for drivers. Close to my city, there's a road that always gets clogged up during peak hours due to a stop sign. This is ridiculous and useless because, as you can see, the road is in the middle of a cornfield. So yeah, no bike lane to blame for creating traffic here. A better alternative would be, for example, to implement more roundabouts. They are much more effective at managing traffic flow. They have narrower pedestrian and cycling crossings, and cars go through them at lower speeds. But even in those lower speeds, it's actually also faster for cars, because if there's no bike or no pedestrian crossing and there's no car to yield to, the cars can just go into the roundabout without stopping. There won't be long waiting lines of cars waiting to cross the intersection like for stop signs. So it's again a win-win situation. It's safer for everyone and it's more efficient for everyone, and that includes drivers and cyclists. And lastly, let's not forget that the cyclists aren't the one driving a 2-ton vehicle at very high speeds. Cars are much more dangerous than bikes for this reason. That's why it's very important to build safe infrastructure such as bike lanes and give them priority, because cyclists are more vulnerable. And this is also why cars breaking rules is more enforced than bikes breaking rules, because again, cars are more dangerous than bicycles. Next point, bike lanes are expensive. Bike lanes are not cheap. It comes with a cost like for any infrastructure. But there's something that's even more expensive and that car drivers directly pay for. And what's that? Well, car ownership. The car itself, gas, maintenance, insurance, all of those make up a good chunk of car owners' monthly expenses. So comparing all of this money to the few tax dollars that you pay towards bike lane construction is not comparable. And some people say that spending any money towards bike lanes is useless and that it should go towards more important things. First, it's never a bad thing to spend some money towards infrastructure to improve the mobility of a city and also contribute to less deaths on the road. Being against spending some money towards infrastructure that will prevent people from dying on their way to work is pathetic. And lastly, some people might not want to get into debt just to own a car. And some people might not even have the money for that because car ownership is very expensive. So it's important to acknowledge the situation of those people and give them alternatives. Good, reliable, safe alternatives such as bicycle lanes. So to conclude, bike lanes are good for everyone, even if you don't plan to use them yourself. They reduce traffic, improve local businesses, gives more accessibility and independence to kids and old people, makes cities safer, healthier, and so on and so on. I'm not saying that bikes should replace every car trip, but we need to give people the freedom to choose a better way of moving around in the city. Thank you for watching this video and see you on the next one.